Hello, everyone. This is a short video about the homework for week 8. So if you've done it, then consider this a review. And if you're still working on that assignment, then this will be a good place to start. If you haven't seen the other videos that I've made about half steps and whole steps, please check those out first. This is just going to go over the process of the exercises on the homework. So if you take this first example that I have written out here, I've labeled some things. So starting on a note D, the assignment is simply to write half steps above the note, right? And so the first one is a diatonic half step, the second, as you see here, the second is chromatic. Now, so I've labeled those for us. Notice this label as well, the enharmonic label, right? Diatonic and chromatic half steps from the same note, they're going to be enharmonic. So look at the keyboard and notice that the D natural is our starting note. And then if we go up a diatonic half step, we get E flat. If we go up a chromatic half step, we get a D sharp. Those are the same key on the keyboard, right? They're the same sounding pitch. They sound the same to our ears, right? It's just a matter of how we spell them that's different, right? So if that's confusing to you at this point, just go back and check out the half steps video that I did for you guys. Now let's do another example. So if we're starting on the pitch F and we want to write a diatonic half step above, remember diatonic half steps, we're changing the letter name. So what's the next letter above F? That's going to be G. So we'll add a G there. And now to make sure that we have a half step, we should be going from F, this key, to the next adjacent key up, right? So one note higher, as close as we can. So that's not going to be G natural that I have here. It's going to actually be G flat. And watch, as I add the flat sign here, that the key on the keyboard is going to change. There we go, G flat. So we get F to G flat half step. Great, and so I can actually label this down here as well. There's my G flat. And the chromatic half step. So there's two ways to do this, right? I can think first from our starting note and actually write a chromatic half step. So take F and raise it by a half step. That means basically add a sharp. If I start with a natural note and I want to raise it by a half step chromatically, then I add a sharp sign, right? So here's my F sharp. And now the best way to double check that you've done the right, that you've got the right answers for both is to make sure that each of these half steps are enharmonics with each other, right? So G flat and F sharp should be the same key on the keyboard, and we see that that's the case. All right, let's try a couple in bass clef. So moving down here, starting on A, and when we're in bass clef, nothing changes, right? We just have to make sure that we notice the clef change. That's the biggest problem, is not noticing that a clef has changed. So in bass clef, we start down here with A. Again, notice the keyboard. A diatonic half step. Remember, we're changing the letter name, so A has to be some kind of B. And A up to B flat, we see, there we go, the next adjacent key. A sharp is going to be enharmonic with B flat, right? We can see that. Again, we're starting with natural pitches here. So A natural. To add a chromatic half step above that, we're basically just adding a sharp sign, right? Okay, great. And over here to the final example here, writing above, E natural is our starting note. So a diatonic note above E. Notice on the keyboard where E is, diatonic half step, we're changing letter names. So the next note above E is F, right? Some sort of F. And if you look on the keyboard here, E natural to F natural, there is our half step, right? So E to F, we don't need any accidentals, right? This is the next adjacent note over on the keyboard, right? Now, how about the chromatic half step? So E, again, this one is going to remain quite simple because we're starting with natural pitches, and all we have to do to raise it by a half step chromatically is add that sharp sign, right? That means raise by a half step, so E to E sharp is our chromatic half step. And again, just double checking the F and E sharp are enharmonic. They're the same key on the keyboard. All right, so let's try a couple examples of writing half steps below a given note. So here's our example. We start with the same pitch as before, the D natural. This time, the only thing that's changed, the process is exactly the same, except that we're finding the adjacent key one note below. Or if you're on a looking at a keyboard like this, it's just one key to the left, right? Or one key closer to the headstock if you're on a guitar or a bass, right? One fret closer. So D down to C sharp is our diatonic half step, right? We're changing letter names again, so D to C sharp, chromatic half step, D to D flat. Okay, great. Let's do an example. So F, again, we're starting on F, and now I want to go diatonic half step below. So what's a note, the next letter name below F? That's going to be E. So I'm adding E here, F to E, right? So always going, if you're thinking on the staff, a good rule of thumb when you're writing diatonic half steps is to always go to the next line or space. So if I'm on a space here with F, then I need to go to the line below that, right? That's going to change your letter name, of course. And so that's a good way to double check as well. Notice here that F and E are already half steps, just natural, so no accidentals needed. They're adjacent keys. Now, if I'm starting from F and I need a chromatic half step below, then I can stick to F, right? The letter name won't change for a chromatic half step, but I need to add an accidental. To lower a note by a half step, we're adding a flat. So F to F flat is our chromatic half step. Again, noticing here that E natural, F flat are enharmonically spelled. They're the same key on the keyboard. A couple examples in bass clef now. If we go to A natural, and I want to write a diatonic half step below. The next letter name below A is, of course, G, right? And you can see that on the keyboard, A down to G. Now, to make it a half step, remember, I got to keep the starting note the same. The goal is to make this second note, this diatonic half step note, a half step below it. So if I add a sharp to that note, then we can see here that A down to G sharp, just one little half step, adjacent keys, great. In the chromatic half step, remember I'm keeping the same letter name as the starting note, so it's got to be some kind of A. And to lower a note by a half step, a natural note, I add a flat. So A natural, down a half step to A flat, that's my chromatic half step. Again, these are enharmonic. See that the key does not change. All right, and one more example. We're still in bass clef. We're starting on E, and I want to write a diatonic half step below. So again, changing letter names, E down to some sort of D. So notice the E on the keyboard, some sort of D. What's the accidental going to be from this E here down a half step? It's not D natural, that's a whole step because I skip a key, so I have to add that sharp to the D. So E down to D sharp. Take a look at the keyboard, E, D sharp, adjacent keys. Great, and then last thing here, chromatic half step. Remember, keeping the same letter name as the starting note. So I start with E, and I need to lower this E natural by a half step. Remember, when you start with an E natural, or any natural note, all you have to do to lower it chromatically by a half step is add a flat sign. And so that's what I do there. Notice that D sharp and E flat are enharmonic notes. They're the same key in the keyboard. All right, and that's great. That hopefully will help you guys uh, understand this homework assignment and moving forward into scales and things of that nature that we're going to do this week. So use this to help you with your homework assignment or to go over your homework assignment again. On the second part of the homework assignment, I'll just say quickly that you're labeling half and whole steps on a keyboard, right? Or you're identifying them. And so use the same strategy where you are just counting, literally counting keys. If two notes are adjacent, like this, E and D sharp, for example, that's a half step just because the keys are right next to each other. If you're skipping a note, then it's a whole step, right? And so if you're confused on that one, check out the whole steps video that I uploaded yesterday. And I hope this helps. Let me know if you have questions in the discussion forum. Thank you.